Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for being here. Welcome back to the semester, and it's good to see so many colleagues here from many departments and also visiting colleagues. This is a special lecture for the second semester of 2024. We are restarting our public seminar series. We were on a break, and it's great to really have colleagues back. And also to have a really good colleague by my side who is going to speak to today's lecture. So this lecture today is the first in the series of our annual lecture, which is dedicated to our colleague Abonga Sitela, whom I will speak to shortly. Abonga Sitela passed on last year. Just yesterday, so it's 1 year anniversary, but I'll speak to him about him just shortly. But for the rest of 2024, we have a full program, the entire seminar series and also special lectures, and you can consult this program on the HUMA website. Just a reminder for consent, that we are recording this session today, and it will be available on our YouTube channel, and it's also available on Teams. And please, you should let one of our colleagues know if you do not want to be recorded or photographed during this session, just to respect him. So just to speak to our colleague Abonga Sitela, he passed on when he was just 37. Last year. So Saturday was actually his anniversary. He was born on the 27th of July, 1986, and died on the 29th of July, 2023, just last year. And he passed on tragically following a car accident during that morning. And it's interestingly, we're having the Olympics now because he really loves sports, and also passed on at the time when he was also just watching sports. He was a lecturer in musicology, the South African College of Music, here at UCT in the Faculty of Humanities. And his appointment was made possible through a teaching fellowship, which we coordinate here under the Turning the Tide academic pipeline project, which is supported by the Mellon Foundation. During the period that he was also here as a teaching fellow, he was a fellow here at the Institute of Humanities, where he was really part of the team. And in the last half, just before he passed on, we had made him responsible for arts development, and he was preparing to launch an arts development initiative here at HUMA. So at the South African College of Music, he had been teaching historical musicology since 2020 when we hired him, and also had been a teaching assistant in the extended degree and diploma program at UCT since 2020, where he was the tutor in historical musicology courses since 2018. He was also a teaching assistant for the academic development program at the UCT Center for Higher Education Development called CHED since 2013. He completed his Bachelor of Music and Bachelor and Honors degree in Musicology, and also a Master's in Musicology at the South African College of Music, examining the impact of having choir in the community. And he was really passionate about choir and about singing. And his doctoral studies in historical musicology at the South African College of Music centered on music as a lens through which to read complex decolonial and epistemic questions about South Africa. And I'll speak a little bit to that project shortly. At HUMA, we remember him very fondly as a beautiful and very honest and kind and generous human being, and always provoking laughter. If you see many of his photos, he was always looking to the sky. He was a sociable and really outgoing, respectful, and very active sports person, and had a lot of talent for singing. last week, I think Saturday, a few colleagues went to commemorate, because on Saturdays he liked to go to a particular eating and drinking spot, and make all of us drunk. So colleagues in the South African College of Music also remembered how, and throughout his postgraduate studies, and already in his final years of the Bachelor of Music, Mr. Sitela sought to guide many students who were struggling with the university environment, also given his own experience, during that study. So he was a very good mentor in music, and also did lots of outreach programs, particularly on the weekends and on Saturday, where he coordinated many mentors. So to speak to his PhD, the PhD he submitted, which we particularly are passionate about. His PhD, a proposal that he had prepared and was about to embark on, was about music as an expression of activism against the patriarchal and colonial suppression of Black women. It's very interesting, from where he started and where he ended, which is also a testament of the relationships that he constituted in the space and how much he also got to read. But the proposal was really examining the roles of women and the roles that women play in South African music in the last century. And he was really focusing on particular case studies, on 3 case studies in particular. Nokutela Mdima Dube, and Charlotte Mangwekwe, and also Princess Makoko Kadimi Zulu. And what we really wanted to do was really to examine how... We see a lot of... Okay, sorry. Yeah, was really to examine how these women used music for activism, and also as a transformative project. So for us, it's very special in commemorating this period. The colleagues, we decided to name a special lecture after Bonga Sitela, an annual lecture, which our brother here will be delivering, to us. And this annual lecture, we've named him the Bonga Sitela annual lecture, just to celebrate and commemorate that time, and also the struggle of having to move from particular place to another, for also students coming from minority, and also to develop the next generation of students dealing with issues about decoloniality, about gender, about feminist work. And there is no better person, to do that for us today, as a young scholar who we hope will start a tradition of young and emerging scholars to do this special lecture for us. So I'm going to introduce our lecturer for today, our speaker, who is Eyob Balcha Gebremariam, my friend and my brother. And the title of his lecture today is The Africa Charter and Africa's Ecosystem of Health Research and Policy Making, and a decolonial approach. I am losing something from that side. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, and this is really coming from a project that we embarked on since 2020. And the Africa Charter for Transformative Research Collaborations, which was launched in Maputo, in Windhoek. Maputo is my head. Even though I didn't go to Maputo. But I was there and I heard so much about Maputo, so it's in my head. But it was launched in Windhoek last year, and we have over 100 signatories right now, and it's really a central instrument for thinking through scientific collaborations and research now globally. And Eyob was really central in building this project as a research fellow where he was. So Eyob is an awardee of the joint UCT University of Bristol Fellowship and a visiting fellow at HUMA. He won the 2022 Tandika Kandawire Prize for Outstanding Scholarship in African Political Economy and Economic Development. He's actually very passionate about Tandika Kandawire. He's a research associate at the Perivoli Africa Research Center at the University of Bristol. He received his doctorate degree in development policy and management from the University of Manchester in the UK. He taught African political economy and African development at the London School of Economics and Political Science from 2017 to 2021. And he also held Matessa Fellowship position at the Institute of Development Studies in Sussex in the UK in 2016 and 2017. And his research areas include the politics of knowledge production in Africa, focusing on decolonial perspectives, African political economy, the politics of development, and young citizens' engagement in politics. And we are looking forward to listening to your talk and then also to engage in the Q&A. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Divine. It's really a great honor and privilege to be part of this memorial lecture. And yeah, I will go straight to the talk. Joy will help me in sharing, so I'll share it from here. You do the virtual. Okay, good. So, so as you could hear from Divine's presentation of my bio, my primary interest is on the politics of knowledge production from using the colonial perspectives, and also based on my training on political economy and development studies. So I'm trying to connect these two and focus on one of the topics of the fellowship between UCT and Bristol, that's public health. So I'm bringing these two issues to initiate a research program. And so public health is my interest in this particular issue. So I'm trying to understand what kind of role does the African Charter can help in terms of understanding the ecosystem of health research in the continent and also the policy-making processes. And this is just part of the literature review that will be definitely shaping the empirical work that I'll be doing. And I want to start with two anecdotes, if you want. The first one is, if you remember, there was some kind of conversation that happened during COVID between two French scientists who wanted to try new vaccine of COVID on Africa, depicting Africa as their laboratory and Africans as their subjects of study. So there was a huge uproar, and yeah, it passed, nothing new. And there's also another anecdote that I also want us to reflect at the end of my presentation. That is a conversation between one UK-based researcher with whom that I worked as part of my doctoral study, who happened to raise a question whilst interviewing a senior official at one East African country, Ministry of Health. And the question was, like, paraphrasing, what's your plan what's your 5-year strategic plan? And that senior official responded, we don't have a plan. We just wait and see what Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation come up with, then we plan accordingly. If he says maternity health, then they will have a strategic plan on maternity. If it is child mortality, if it is breastfeeding, HIV, whatever. So then I question, why is that the case? What has enabled the position of those two French scientists to assume that kind of position, to engage with the continent and Africans from that position of power, what informs their orientation and position. And also questioning why would a particular wealthy American become too powerful, almost like super dominant player in setting a national health policy, strategy, priority, whatever. So what I will be doing is trying to reflect on these two issues. In doing so, I want to use two macro frameworks to understand these issues. These two macro frameworks are coloniality and empire, the empire framework. What I mean by coloniality is essentially built on my understanding, my analytical distinction between what colonization is, what colonialism is, then talking about coloniality, and its manifestations in three domains: coloniality of knowledge, power, and being. And the three forms of empire based on the works of Nvolo Gatseni and the trajectories of decolonization. Quickly, making this analytical distinction between colonialism, colonization, colonialism, and coloniality, my understanding of colonization is primarily like something that has a start and an end. If you want to make it much more in simple terms, the Berlin Conference, 1884, right? And probably most African countries become independent in 1960. So a period of 80 years, for instance, that the physical presence of foreign powers, the time and territorially bounded relationships, but which has, of course, something much more consequential impact in the process. It helps us to shape how societies have interacted with each other, with the foreign dominant power, and also the structures of production and consumption. Because that physical domination was not only about the physical coercion, but also changing people's ethos, their knowledge, their language, domesticating them into the colonizer's mentality and orientation, and also integrating the political economy and scientific system, whatever, into the Western perspective. Then we can talk about colonialism. What I mean by colonialism is then the sustained, go to the next slide, Joe. The sustained institutional manifestations of that particular period of physical domination, especially in the country that where we are, in the settler colonial processes, you would definitely have, and also wherever you go, you'll continue to have those institutionalization of that process of domination and subjugation, exploitation. So that it's not only about then the physical presence or absence of a foreign power, but the reorientation of the cultural, socio-economic, political process of social and political relations. Of course, this idea has been presented even at the very beginning of the post-colonial period, if you want. Kwame Nkrumah was quite clear talking about neocolonialism. It was not just simply about being independent, but rather to ensure that that independence is manifested in terms of shaping your own political economic issues, let alone the health policy sphere. And also that the institutionalization of neocolonialism in terms of its, yes, it's a power that you can feel, but it's probably something that you may not adequately pinpoint, at least at that early stage. Then comes the issue of coloniality. I think it's very important to have this analytical distinction so that we know what we are talking about, because especially building on the works of the Latin American and Caribbean scholars who talk about coloniality, it's more of like the underbelly of modernization, what has been presented as civilization, progress, enlightenment has its, the other side of the equation where about subjugation, where you talk about exploitation, epistemicides, linguicides, because it's not only about the spread of civilization, it's also the process whereby people have been somehow decimated. That's what really is. So we cannot just simply talk about what has happened in terms of development, progress, and civilization as it's being portrayed from Europe, but also we should also try to tell the story from the side of the global south, from the African side, from the Latin Native American people, or from the Aborigine side. So that's what coloniality is all about. Then we can talk about its manifestations in terms of knowledge, where the hierarchization of the knowledge systems or European orientations are perceived dominant, higher, and more relevant than others. The coloniality of power, where the asymmetrical power relation between the global north and the global south is somehow institutionalized. Perhaps COVID is also another good example. When the COVID vaccine was discovered or somehow being used, the global north had more access because people who reside in that part of the world are more valuable, whereby the World Trade Organization was somehow using its institutional and legal framework to protect the intellectual property of using the vaccine for other members of the human race. You also have coloniality of being where the inherent nature of dehumanizing, especially the non-whites. We live in a period of genocide that's currently happening, being televised, right? It is possible because it is the non-white who are suffering it. So that's what coloniality of being is all about. Then I think it's Fabello's framework, the empire framework is, I think, very important as well. He talks about especially the two frameworks, the commercial and territorial military empire and the metaphysical empire. Especially for what I will be talking about, I think the second empire, the commercial and territorial military empire, is quite important because that's where you find the role of Bill Gates or the likes of Bill Gates playing a role in shaping each and every dynamic of social relations in our context. And perhaps as a good illustration with this regard is this map. What you see in this map is the presence of almost 13 or 14 foreign military bases across the continent. Not the usual suspects of, British or French or American or Russian, but also the likes of the UAE, India, Japan, Turkey. So new actors emerging into playing a role in shaping the African geopolitical, social, economic process, contestation, competition for resource and domination and control. So I think this framework, the commercial and territorial military empire framework, would allow us to go beyond that very normalized understanding of neocolonialism or the current manifestations of coloniality. What has enabled these countries to have this kind of military presence? Why is it normalized? Why don't we take it as something abnormal? And we also have lots of historical issues with this regard. You have the French African economic zone, where France has been controlling the finance system of almost the entire Central and Western African countries, the extraction of resources, and also the illicit flows in terms of finance. Of course, Africa has always been presented as relying on aid, but a report by UNCTAD, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development in 2020, proved that the continent has been net creditor to the world. The amount of finance, the amount of money going out of the continent is much more than the amount of money comes into the continent. So these frameworks are, I think, very important for us to understand why we live in this period of individuals creating this kind of dominance in their engagement with the continent. And I'll just quickly move to the metaphysical empire, is more about the epistemic issues. So I want to use the Africa Charter, the way that we, the Africa Charter, the way that we conceptualized Africa's ecosystem of knowledge production as my analytical framework. Because the reason why we come up with the Africa Charter is when you look into the ecosystem of knowledge production and scientific knowledge production in the continent, what you see is almost all the publication that's registered in the name of African countries is produced based on international research collaborations. And most of these collaborations are with countries like the USA, UK, and France. And the health science, of course, all over the world, health science dominates the number of scientific publications, but it's quite staggering in the African context, 49% on average. You have some countries whose scientific publication, almost 90% of their scientific publication is on public health issues or health-related fields. But also, there are also issues of not investing enough in other fields of studies. You know, the other sciences, maths, physics, engineering, or arts or social science, and also most African countries are not investing well and in their science infrastructure. And what we bring here is to understand the ecosystem of scientific knowledge production in the continent as multiple layers, as a sphere where there are multiple layers of power imbalances. And at the core of these multiple layer imbalances, we created these 6 layers: is the epistemic orientation, the process where Africa is considered as a place of no knowledge, no epistemic orientation, whereby Eurocentric knowledge frameworks are considered the only way through it that you produce knowledge. Or whenever you come across African knowledge, you label it as indigenous knowledge so that you particularize it, you make it relevant only to that particular context, and you universalized unintentionally the European-centered knowledge so that it's much more applicable here, but the knowledge from here is quite particularized. And the second layer is language. Most of the scientific knowledge that's being produced within the continent is produced based on colonially imposed language, and our languages are not adequately recognized good enough for scientific knowledge production. The third layer is about extraversion. It's just a replica of our economic system. In our economies, we produce what we don't consume. We produce cocoa, coffee, timber, but we consume what we don't produce. We consume the chocolate, right? The processed coffee, the furnitures. Similarly, most of the scientific knowledge production within the continent is geared towards the global north, for the consumption of the global north rather than to our community. So it's quite interconnected. And the fourth layer is about the development gate and the development frame. Almost everything is based on donation and aid, so that it's framed in terms of what's lacking, what's the problem. So it's problem-solving mentality. Because Africa is depicted as a place of misery, of lack, of destitution and everything, so that what you study is what's missing. And also very much unidirectional, so only from the north to the continent. And the outer layers, particularly in terms of capacity between our institutions and organizations, and also the unequal power relations between the researchers in the continent and outside of the continent, are important. So I think this is a very good analytical framework. It's not just because I was part of the process of co-developing with Divine and our colleagues, Professor Pulensegallo at UNISA and Professor Isabella Boderin at Bristol. It allows us to unpack a lot of issues and the connection between them, rather than just simply focusing on what's visible to our eyes, that is the unequal power relation between individuals and researchers, which is informed by the more unseen aspect of the problem. You know, the iceberg, the tip of the iceberg is just a very tiny part that you can see. The majority, the enormous part of the iceberg is below the water, right? So coming back to the two anecdotes. So to what extent my understanding of coloniality and empire and the framing and the understanding of the Africa's ecosystem of knowledge production would allow me to unpack why this has happened, why these two people have the privilege, the power to exercise this kind of, position of privilege to go to Africa and, do a vaccine test. And Bill Gates to have that kind of position of determining the policy process of a particular country. To begin with, I think we can speak about a number of issues, right? We can talk about scientific racism, eugenics, the rationalization of hierarchy between race, between people. And as someone here in Cape Town, I think we know more about what the story of Sarah Brightman. I don't really wanted to bring the picture, which is for me it's still very dehumanizing. And I think there's what do you call it? A museum, like a depiction of her still image. I don't know whether it's in a museum or somewhere, but I saw this picture where people kind of tagged issues still the way that's being presented there. It is not just a sculpture. One of the note there, it says it's not just a piece of cloth, it's centuries of trauma, what we have seen in Sarah Brightman's experience. It's a co-party of colonialism, whereby Black woman's body is portrayed as an object of display, as just presenting the series of body parts. So I prefer to show this image of her dignified burial process rather than that very dehumanizing image. But we can learn from what has happened to her. And of course, colonialism and the domination of societies. But also apart from that, I think it's very important to connect the dots in terms of to what extent the neoliberal political economic order has contributed in shaping and dismantling the state-society relationship within the continent, whereby health issues are considered quite like a commodity that can be bought and sold on a market, so that the role of the state in making this service available is somehow questioned, but rather the role of the market is dignified and glorified. And the relationship between the continent and the global extractive capitalist system, whereby all our luxury lifestyle of using technology is relying on the extraction of resources, the destruction of livelihoods and environment and health systems, the process of agenda setting through Can you go to the next slide, Joe, please? The process of agenda setting through the universalized development frameworks, such as the MDGs and the SDGs, which are always go in favor of the global north corporations, knowledge actors, universities, and the researchers, and also the depiction of African, or in general, the global south population as a threat to the civilization of the global north because of migrants, the neo-Malthusian understanding of migration and population growth. So all these processes connect with each other, starting from the eugenics, that racialized understanding of relationship between human beings, to the current system of the SDGs framework. There is a thread that connects each and everything. So I see these structural elements as vital instruments of understanding Africa's ecosystem of health policy making and also research. So going quickly. So I don't want to see the health policy making process just as technocratic process of understanding the context. You have access and processes whereby ideas will be discussed and you act on that. That's a very narrow and very limited understanding of policy making processes, because what we live in is a period of coloniality, a period of subjugation and domination, which determines who set the agenda, who is the researcher, who is the funder, what kind of purpose, what kind of orientation, what kind of motive is embedded into that. Which brings me to this topic of philanthrocapitalism, because that's what the likes of Bill Gates are doing. They are using the logics of the market, the logics of generating benefits and economic resource to shape social and public policy. It's a process of agenda setting, using the wealth. So the system has somehow privileged them because they are wealthy. So they are now considered also equally knowledgeable and wise enough to shape and to determine what's happening in a particular country and location. So it's also a process of ensuring that the role of the market, the neoliberal ideology, is somehow normalized and presented as a panacea. So I'll come up with at least 4 specific themes that I want to explore further when I go into identifying some empirical elements to further substantiate my argument here. That is the racist and the new Malthusian orientation towards Africa's population, the deserving and the undeserving poor, the containment of migration, how the would-be illegal migrant is presented, the African or Asian migrants who died while crossing the Mediterranean are always depicted as the would-be illegal migrant, the would-be illegal. So their humanization is somehow questioned. They are defined as a threat. And if you remember, Joseph Borrell was talking about the jungle and the garden, the jungle that can be invaded, the garden that can be invaded, the European Union head of foreign policy. And the other theme that I would like to further explore is to what extent philanthrocapitalism is essentially shaped by neoliberal ideologies, whereby the entrepreneurial individual and the market are presented as the panacea to address everything, and financialization, the use of the mechanisms of the finance sector as an instrument, as a methodology of solving health-related issues. And the fourth one, governmentality and soft power, controlling, disciplining of populations and concealing, not talking about the destructive capitalist relationship. Because most of the destruction, most of the misery, most of the problem that we have across the world in general, and in particular in the continent, is the result of extractive capitalist system. But philanthrocapitalism doesn't present that as a problem, but rather presents population growth or environmental issues that are related to that as a problem that need to be solved. So that the bigger problem is always concealed. And finally, the way in which that the very business-oriented, data-driven policies are promoted rather and very vertical orientation. So vaccine, rather than talking about a systemic approach of addressing health-related issues. So health issues are always presented as biomedical problems that can be solved through tech-oriented and technical solutions rather than in a very broader sense. So to conclude, the way that I would answer what enabled these people and Bill Gates to have this kind of dominance is essentially because of the interplay between empire and coloniality. That's where I am at the moment, and I hope it triggered some ideas and things that we can discuss. Thank you for your attention.
Great. Thank you, Eyob. I'm just going to go straight to open for the colleagues, questions, comments, fights. Great.
Yeah, I think in Chicago,
I used to be environmental women.
I'm now sitting in the engineering department, and when I hear you, I'm sitting now in the monthly meetings and in policy. So this is the nature of the nation state that's organized a way to support capital accumulation. So, what are your thoughts on what Africans and people can do differently? Because our governments are essentially
Second question. Yes, please.
Maybe also kind of building on what's already stated. There are already so many variables that case of African agency, your whole theorization. You can or in your framework of coloniality, have you also kind of considered the idea of complicity? We all are we all kind of complicit in propagating what is going on, or is it just something that is important for us and we just about plans? Can we shape policy? Can we shape strategy? Also, if I may add funding as well, I think one dimension that we need to talk about is much of the research on the continent is funding in graduate studies. It's funded by us agencies elsewhere. Why aren't we? What are we doing about raising the funding on the continent? And they say, one who calls the pipe, one who pays the pipe calls the tune in a way. So maybe we can.
We're going to hold those two questions just so you can respond to them quickly. Then I have three other questions I've noted. Okay.
Either colonial or having this sleeping back colonial. Somehow about being concerned about Africa as an. So there's something about not being able to respond completely. I know that we can respond it, but at least we kind of figure out a way to create that narrative that with people we know each colonial. One of the things that I always find, and it's something that has been raised with finding, is that we don't have to put question on the wishes within the young. Something related to our lack of studies on class analysis. Understanding about of this power of conversation, but I think we don't question about class in the young. We have over 20 rich classes in CA that I have read, who have between 15 billion and 2 billion. Somehow you have that sort of place. It's not compatible with the others, but at least you have a vision. And so if we don't integrate that and then really into ourselves, we ask ourselves, then why?
I'm going to ask you to respond to this or not. Comments or not comment, and then we'll see what other contributions we have.
I will try to address all the three questions together, if you want. About yet the state is captured. Most of the African states are colonial constructs. They were initially designed to serve the colonial logic. So at the moment, it would be extremely difficult to use them as an instrument of fighting back. That's my understanding. Because their structure is essentially colonial, and it's a continuation of that. So what people can do differently, yes, because the states are captured, yeah. I don't want to be too oblivious, at the same time not to be too pessimistic as well. But of course, the engagement should also need to happen outside of the state. And we need to valorize and recognize spaces that are created outside of the space, social movements that engage with the states and create power from below, and not just simply remain quite submissive to the structures of power exercised both for the states and also global power that sometimes use the structure of the state. So definitely grassroots-based social mobilization is, I think, the most valid way of moving forward. And if progressive ideas are strong enough and able to capture the state, then you can also use the state as an instrument. But usually what happens is, because of the multiple layers of complexities of power dynamics, you know, what Lumumba tried to do, what Sankara tried to do. So the state will definitely fight back and have also both internal and external powers. In terms of African agency and also complexity, yes, that should definitely be an issue. But I think it's also very important to see what informs that complexity. That's why I'm talking about also the metaphysical empire, understanding that we operate within a context where the alternative is always considered non-credible or non-existent, right? So the agency becomes relevant only when it can question what it has taken as for granted, something. It's only when you question hegemony that your agency can be emancipatory. Otherwise, your agency and your way of exercising agency can play just simply a role to reinforce hegemony and reinforce coloniality. So the agency would be much more important so long as it's radical enough, clear enough to identify what does not exist, what is always portrayed as non-credible and non-viable alternative to what already exists. So I'm just using the sociology of absence framework that the Portuguese philosopher, I forget his name, was talking about. In terms of the richest people in Africa, just similar to the African states, they are also complicit. Most of them become rich because they play to the tunes of colonialism and coloniality, right? So just simply assuming that because they are rich, they will be part of this the colonial movement, I really doubt that. Yes, we have, you know, the Tinibus and the Mo Ibrahims, but most of them, they generate their wealth by playing with the logic of colonialism, and also very much hand in hand with the neoliberal ideology, right? That's what, there's also a study about Afro philanthropism, whatever. Yes, and it's just simply a copy paste of the neoliberal ideology and just like reshaping that neoliberal perspective with African wealthy people. So I really doubt that would be would to go.
Great. I'm going to ask to extend the time by 10 minutes, if colleagues don't mind, just so that we address some of the important issues, 10 to 15 minutes. But I think also just linked to that to ask you to reflect a little bit. It's about the question of translation, because philanthropy is a particular way of framing a relationship within a capitalist system.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you unpack the concept of philanthropy, which is really narrowing it down to particular people with resources who go to support something. You exclude a large part. I mean, a big part of the continent is supported by people on this continent, those who go to school, hospitals, roads, all of that stuff. So we don't count that as philanthropy. You know, all my health bills are not paid by Bill Gates, by my parents, family, and lots of other people. School fees on this campus paid by lots of others, not calculated. So again, if you take that logic of decoloniality, I wonder how you can unpack also this question of, philanthropy trapped in this coloniality, and also how we see philanthropy, because we focus so much on the wealthy and forget that it is the ordinary people who make the continent to function, you know. But I'm going to go to Bjorn, and then after Bjorn, I'll come to Susan. Sorry. Oh, there's also a question online. Two questions. Yes, I'll ask those two questions at the end, but let me first go to Bjorn.
These are very nice genealogy, so why would we have today? So I was also very happy to have achieved a journey. I read alongside Felvisar a few years ago just to compare the ambitions of people. That way, I would like to just ask you, I mean, in global Virginia's work, epistemic freedom, seems to be an argument to go quite a long way to break free, to break away from epistemic freedom is something fundamental. It goes multi-layered, it's a structural problem. While the Africa Charter, in my view, is a way to rethink bridges, you know, between ways of doing research in and on with Africa, also with Northern African higher education. So I was just wondering if you could reflect on that kind of tension between breaking free, rethinking from Africa, and the kind of perhaps compromises that need to be made. And just as a footnote, I mean, the way you describe higher education in forms of violence systems, you know, that's as much and now a reality for higher education.
Okay, Susan, thanks. Susan, last questions.
But when we were on session, we did the study now. Just get back to your, where you opened the idea as a laboratory and not a space from which agendas are set, a space from which knowledge is even recognized. And so I guess my question is about how is it possible that certain forms of like a massive biologists here at UCP who've been working on an HIV vaccine for the past 32 years. And we're quite close to developing the vaccine, but didn't get there. And when the Operation Warp Speed, Trump's, Operation Warp Speed took hold, those same scientists here who've been working on the HIV vaccine for 35 years, within a period of 2 months, developed the Johnson & Johnson COVID vaccine. 2 months. What they did was they found something to build on top of the HIV vaccine that worked to prevent, not prevent totally COVID, but to reduce it. And so that was produced here, just here. Laboratories where they were doing the trials were also here. And so what became global knowledge was this vaccine, but never tied to this particular place. And so the rage that ensued among the scientists was a rage that, in fact, had they had something like Operation Warp Speed or the agenda setting of Bill Gates, they could have had an HIV vaccine probably 30 years ago and prevented. So I guess my question is question so much as this very troubling convergence of visualization of knowledge production, but that it's also tied to capital. The capacity for the scientists located here
this extraordinary brilliance and creativity and innovation was only rendered possible by somebody like Trump. Was fascist. So, he was, able to galvanize. So how does one actually begin to, you laid it out so wonderfully, and I guess the question is so linked to divine sense that, it's galvanizing force of capital enables certain things and activate certain things. But at the same time, they don't set the agenda, and they don't necessarily produce the knowledge that's happening on. So I'm just curious about that. Really,
you should hold that. The last question. That's the last question for the room. There are 2 questions online, and those are the last. Those who constitute the last questions. One question is from Tadese Hinok. Philanthrocapitalism has all the issues related to loss of accountability to the public and all attendant issues. In respect of perpetuating pre-existing power imbalances, how different is it from the multilateral and bilateral structures and processes? And then the last question, to close everything off, he said, thank you for the insightful. This question is from Tabit, from Sarah. Sarah Tabit, thank you for the insightful discussion. How do you see the role of the African Union and RECs, academic institutions, the media, as well as regional and local CSOs in countering philanthrocapitalism and coloniality more broadly? That is it.
Okay.
That is it.
I will start from the last question, from Sarah's question about how do I see? Yeah, it's more related to what I also said earlier. The African states has been essentially, most of the African states are colonial constructs and serve the colonial logic before the flag independence. And after flag independence, almost all the radical voices were silenced, and only those who conformed to the interests of the external powers sustained. And what we have at the moment, be it at the African Union level, be it at the regional economic communities level, is more of like a very a status quo confirming system, right? So we have, for instance, the Africa CDC, which came into existence quite recently, right? And yeah, the funding, it was a battleground between the Chinese and the US, because they see controlling Africa CDC is very strategic for the data, for the access of data, and also for geopolitical issues. So, Africa is always very much at the losing end. So for me, I don't want to be too pessimistic, but also at the same time not to be too oblivious, right? That's that contradiction. The pessimism of the intellect and the optimism of the will is always there, right? Yeah, I want to see the African Union, the RECs, and the states to play a better role, but they are extremely captured. Just yesterday or the day before, the Ethiopian states devalued the currency by 30% and just received a 3.4 billion credit facility by the IMF. So we live in a period of, state capture. We live in a period of structural adjustments right at the moment. So talking about this regional decision-making and bodies as viable and potential actors of this emancipatory project is, for me, a bit, I would be extremely suspicious, but I don't want to devalue their position and role as well. In terms of the accountability of philanthrocapitalism, yeah, they are not accountable. Bill Gates is not accountable to any of the countries where he invests in billions, to the Indians, to the Kenyans, to the Ethiopians, to the Ugandans. So there's zero accountability, but yet he contributes almost 10% to the World Health Organization budget and then set the agenda. So they just simply use intervention, vaccine, and use just simply a biomedical technocratic approach to the solution. So there is no accountability whatsoever. So they are part of the problem. I forgot your name. Susan. Yeah, thank you for telling us that story. That's very insightful. And you just simply gave us a good case study to understand how things are happening. I may just simply outline some of the debates, but the story that you told us is just simply a manifestation of how power kind of continue to reinforce its dominance. And I don't know how to respond to your question rather than just simply taking it as a good example of demonstrating and illustrating what I was talking about. Yeah, Bjorn, thank you. I definitely see a tension. And my interest is especially on, I most of the time, I want to focus on the epistemic issues. But so when you talk about epistemic injustice, you have to also show how that epistemic injustice is manifested and be bold enough to come up to understand and to uncover the so-called disregarded epistemic orientations. And what we are trying to do, the charter is both a policy framework to engage with policy and decision makers, an intellectual project where you can question bigger issues, which may not necessarily have a direct impact in terms of setting or changing policy orientations, but at least trying to start the conversation about rebalancing. Africa being the richest continent with lots of, with huge contribution to the human population across the world, but being extremely marginalized. There is a lot that need to be challenged. But the charter, it's also being driven by universities, right? Universities also, as you said, and I agree with that, are part of the problem. So yes, the tension is there, but I don't think the charter is kind of closed. It doesn't close the door for those critical issues to be raised, as I'm part of the process. So I try to raise these questions. Big Brother Divine, about philanthropy. Yeah, I totally understand. I think we shouldn't just simply obey what's already been told us. This is what philanthropy is. Because we live in a society where giving and taking and receiving and sharing whatever we have, both the material and the immaterial aspect of sharing, should be equally recognized and valued, so that it's not only the one that's counted into the capitalist system that should be considered as philanthropy. Care, love. We don't like I hate when people talk about the care economy. It's not an economy. It's not transactional. It's way beyond that. So, but philanthropy doesn't have the epistemic space to understand it in that way. So I totally understand your point.
Thank you. That's a very good way to. So I want to thank my colleagues Dominic, Joy.